Hey guys, Mr. Steve back. Welcome to part 2 of Let's Make an Add-on with Serpent's Visual Scripting Add-on found on the Blender Market. I don't get paid or sponsored for this, but buying a bunch of add-ons can get very expensive. Some of them are better to buy, because the learning curve is probably a good 4 to 6 months before you really get the program down, unless you've got a lot of time on your hands. So let's get started. Hey guys, welcome. This is part 2 where we're going to build a loop interface, and this is going to help us kind of put some stuff on the map here and identify which modifier has which object, or vice versa, however you want to think about it. So Shift A and S, and I'm going to type in loop. Now there's a loop for execute, and there is a loop interface. So the interface loop is what we're going to be using, and the execute would go over here. Okay, you could loop through different collections, and you can output, you can repeat the process, whatever node setup you have, and then afterwards you can just continue with your program, whatever you got. You can select the output type for the items in the collection, and you'll figure all this out. And yes, these can be just tagged directly into a line. So I'm just going to delete that, and I'll come back over here, and I can drop this in right here, but I don't want to do that. I want to create a whole new output on the panel for this, so it's going to show up outside of the box, because this is just going to be a little bit different. So just focusing on the loop for interface node, it's looking for a collection. It's going to repeat everything in that collection and continuously check what's in that collection, and then it's going to output that data based on the data type here. And then you can do a display property, and when you tag that property in right here, and you'll see that in just a minute, it's going to loop through those properties that you specify for your output data over here, because there's no collection connected right now. So let's go grab a collection. Let's go to blend data and kind of extend this thing out just a little bit like that. And so over here in data, and if you look through here, you'll see a ton of collections. And if you drop anything down, if it's not in the scene, you won't see the item, the object rather, because I am over in data objects. What you will see is a bunch of collections though. So we're going to go to objects, main objects. I'll click the plane, and I want to come down to modifiers, and you'll see that I have a modifier collection. I just want to copy the modifier from the objects modifiers under data, and then I'm going to come back, Shift V, and I want to make this an active property. So it's actually going to be using the active, and I'll just tag the square socket into the square socket. Very simple. That's a collection. The round socket's not going to produce the data that you need, so don't connect that. Square to square. And what's going to happen now is we need something displayed out here. So Shift A S, you can put in a display property. Okay, you can immediately tag that in, and we don't have anything displayed. And there's also another way to display properties, and I'll show you that in just a minute. So let's go back into data, and under objects and under plane, what we're going to do is we're going to actually just do a little search, make this nice and easy. So go ahead right here, and we want to type in name. And what this is going to do is this is going to grab the name of the object plane. And let me try to get this out of there. And if we put a trigger in here, I'll Shift V, drop that in, and I'll create a save point. So if I put in a trigger and a print again, and we'll tag this in, and all this is, the trigger is just a way to debug things and figure stuff out. And I'll take the name of objects and plug it in. And now when I run the trigger, it says plane. And I want to make this the active property. If I run trigger, it's going to say plane. If I come over here and put in a cube and run trigger, it's going to say cube, and so on. So the name is just going to grab the name of the active object, and that helps us because we need the name objects. And I can just Control J, keep this, and let's just name this debug. All right, and we're going to throw our debug over here, more or less in like an empty workspace. And I'm going to go ahead and save that again. And now what I can do is I can actually display the name right here on the label. Okay, and nothing has happened. But remember, I'm outputting data here, and I need this to be a property. So let me kind of scroll back so that list is kind of big. And the little Suzanne monkey head, that's the property. So you'll always see that in a lot of places. That means that is the it's a property socket. It's using the active in most cases. So now I could take the item that is looping through modifier objects, display the name of all objects that are selected. And when I select this, it's going to say no property connected. So I'll go ahead and connect this property, and it's going to now say super sub D, super sub D. So that label, you don't really need that. You can take that off. Now what we want to do is put in an actual label. So Shift A S, and let's type in label. And the label node has a lot of purposes. It's not just for necessarily putting an icon or anything or a label. You can actually display information with it as well. So we're going to go ahead and tag the label in here. And I could just display that, but what we want to do is we want to take this string data that's coming out of here, because this is a string, and I want to break this line with something. So Shift A S, I want to combine the strings, okay? And we do have a node for that, so I'm going to drop that between that and bring it through and create a save point. Now we can add multiple strings to this, which is very useful. So I'm going to add a string, and I'm going to hit space. So that way it kind of moves it forward. And I'm going to type in MOD and then just equal sign and space and hit enter. And it's actually backwards, so I don't want that. And so what I could do is I could tag this under here and remove that. So mod is at the top of the list. And now it's going to say mod equals super sub D, and that's what we're looking for. So what I don't have though is the object type. And so if we go back into blend data, I'm going to need type. So just hit this little back arrow and it clears your search. Now we're going to do this, and every object in here has a type. Pretty much everything has a type, and you'll see right here it's a string, so we can copy that, and I'll X out, Shift V, create a save point, and now I'm going to add another string to this, and I want to go ahead and name that, and I think that should be on top. So yeah, okay, so we'll type in OBJ, but I didn't put my space in there yet, so I'm going to put space, and then we can just put equals in space, and it'll say sub D OBJ. So I mean, maybe something right here, maybe a couple of dashes or something just to kind of bring it out. Make sure to hit enter. And now I want to take the name, or rather, excuse me, the type, and plug that in. So let's take type and Shift D, make a copy. Let's go to our debug area, and I'll drop this in. And inside the debug area here, we can take this and plug it in. Run the trigger, it says mesh. And so now this type is showing us that the object is a mesh that is selected. So if I was to put a camera in and run that, it still says mesh, okay? Because I got this from active, or from the object menu under mesh. So context is super important. You're gonna learn that at some point. And so now I can take this and I can plug this into the string underneath here. You see a little pattern going on, and it made all that disappear. So if I actually Shift R hard recompile, it compiles successfully, but there's still an error. So let's switch this to the active object. Actually, let's select here. There we go. So it came back, but it's still not going to work properly because this is set to plain and not active object. And so you can compile and get it successful. That's not a guarantee that you don't have errors. So switch this to property, and let's tag in right here. And now it automatically is going to say subsurf. Why does it say subsurf if we plug this in? Because it's supposed to be looping items, right? Well, it's actually looping from the modifier object. So any object that has a modifier, it's going to display. And so you're going to actually see subsurf, and so you get different data types. But if you remove that, you just have the mesh, because remember when we checked it, it said mesh. And so that's important. So modifier equals super subd, object equals mesh. And this is cool. I come over here. I don't want to add a bevel to that. I'll add a build. It's very specific. And it is now looping, and the build disappeared. Not really a big deal. I think I gotta pull a timeline up to fix this. Let's pull a timeline up. There it is. Okay, fun. Anyways, there's the mesh. And now you can see I have a build modifier. So modifiers build object mesh. And if I wanted to, I can actually put name on that. Now, if you want to be a little more specific, this is just telling us it's a mesh, which may not be helpful. So if I remove type and bring it over here, and I Shift D, make a copy of name, but I don't connect it to the output and just tag in the string here instead, it's now going to say modifier build, modifier subd, object equals plain. So it's very specific. And, all right, so now that we've done that, we do see that name objects is coming out of modifier objects. Whereas that is actually working, let's change this instead. I'll cut all this out and delete that. Back to blend data, and I want to go over here to data. I'll pull this down, and I want to go to objects, pick up the selected object, which is the plane, and I'm going to come down to modifiers. And if you remember, it doesn't matter what you select, everything has names. So if I select build and just type in name, I'm going to get a string value name. So I can actually go in and Shift V that. Now it's name modifiers object plain. I can set this to property, and I don't want it to just be on the build. So I'll set this to property. It gives us one property. And just so it's not confusing, I'll Shift right click this. And I guess we could just kind of like bring it anywhere. Just bring it out of the way. Now I want the loop item from modifier objects to go into modifier name. Now I can display this property up here, and that contextually will be more correct. Now I don't have to have this display property. I can eliminate this. I just want to slice that and delete the display property. I'll create a save point, and now I can run the name modifiers directly into the string and get a nice clean setup. Now, I really want something like this to kind of be at the top of my add-on. Makes a little bit more sense. Now up here, earlier in the previous video, we connected insert socket buttons. Now here's your chance to shine. So this little up arrow is going to add an actual socket input above the other ones. And this is really difficult. You can't do this anywhere else. So if I click up, let's create a new socket. Click up one more time. I've got a socket at the top. You now eliminate that one. I'm going to cut this loop out right here and unplug the loop in to the top. And now all of that will pop up at the top. Create a save point. And go ahead and delete that other piece there. So now we've got a very basic setup to kind of identify what is going on. And I'm actually going to leave this tutorial the way it is. I think it's getting close to like 20 minutes. So I don't try to make them an hour each time. That's a lot. Especially because there's no background music or anything. I'm just trying to keep it so it can be well studied. And this can be our loop display for mod type and objects. And the more detail you put in, the less you've got to look at it later on. I'm going to go over here to node in the end panel, add some color to this, whatever color. You just come up with something and kind of get there, and bring the display size all the way up to 64. And if it makes a little more sense, we can kind of make this bigger so it can be seen. Now from here, Your add-on is actually exportable at this point, but I'm not going to go over and cover that right now because there's some other things that we need to do in order for you to have a good experience and do this. So we'll cover that at the end of the third video, but that's just like the tip of the iceberg in making add-ons and getting something that actually works. So if you compile this now, you compile successfully, and before we end the video, if I delete this, basically everything is gone, and that's kind of common for a lot of things inside. Go back, cursor. I think I got to readjust my my screen. It's a little glitchy sometimes when Blender is out of like alignment. You got to hit the little square up top and realign it. Yeah, so we'll go in and we will export the add-on in the next video. Don't miss it. Make sure to smash that subscribe, smash that like. I'm building a playlist here. I'm going to try to build it, you know, in a pretty reasonable amount of time, but I don't want to rush it because it's, you know, the data that's in my head has to come out in an understandable way, and I can't really script something like this because errors and things will come up. So Shift R, go ahead and compile that, and it compiles successfully. That's a hard compile, and up here is the soft compile. You can deregister and then re-register the add-on, and we literally just have the panel here because it was always there. The panel was always there. And before we go, let's rename this to sub D, and now down here it's going to say sub D, and then the panel can be my add-on 1.0, and then you can hit enter and it's going to pop up my add-on 1.0. So if you go ahead and actually, now that I think about it, the buttons should actually still be there. So that means we need a check case right here for this. So I still have all of this over here. I can just Control C, copy that. And this is for the actual modifier. So we want to see if there's a modifier present. And just for now, this should work just fine. We'll plug the if-else interface in, and so instantly the buttons now pop back up. Like I said, it'll compile fine, and then you'll get all kinds of errors if you're not, you know, kind of privy to what's going on. So if this modifier is present, and this is just one of many checks, if this modifier is present in the viewport, then we want to, if it's true, we want to run the loop, but we don't want to run the loop unless it's true. And so that way that breaks it, and we don't want that. So if I was to add my plane, then add my sub D, now that pops up, okay? And so now everything is actually technically working. And for the fun of it, our little checkbox here for the optimal display, I did not actually put anything behind it, so let's go find that. And this is why we label everything. So it looks like this is obviously at the bottom, and so if we follow our column down, the last column that we have leads us down here to the if-else check, which is show only control edges and modifiers, optimal display. If I hover over this, it's going to say show only control edges. So if you have the tooltips on, which you need, then that'll show up. And so the tooltips are going to be up here in the edit preferences under interface, and just click on tooltips, Python tooltips right here, and then you'll get that. If you have autosave on, you're good. If you don't, then it'll show save, but if you don't, then you just hit the X. And so we can just go ahead for this in the label section of that display property, put in optimal display. And now we actually know what that is. And it would be good to have a little control over how this looks. So I do want to throw a box in right here. And then I could center this, or I could put it to the right. Let's see, how do I want to do this? And it doesn't seem to want to go over to the right, so it's just an alignment issue, but there's always an option. So I can actually turn this into a toggle on and off for the Boolean switch, and it'll work just fine like that as well. And so now if we compile this, save it, delete, and run a hard check, and the best indication is that all the buttons that are not operators, that are just internal Blender operators, if those are showing up, they're usually good. All right, guys, see y'all in the next tutorial. Thank you for watching.